Welcome to the Overpopulation podcast. I'm Dave Gardner, Executive Director of World Population Balance. World Population Balance works to alert, inform, and educate that overpopulation is a root cause of resource depletion, species extinction, and rising poverty. We advocate and support a smaller, truly sustainable population. Find us at worldpopulationbalance.org or search World Population Balance on Facebook. Laura Carroll is a leading voice on the child-free choice. She tracks and researches the child-free choice and those who make it. She has spent over 15 years doing that. She's interviewed and spoken with thousands who have made this choice. She ran the popular blog La Vie Child-Free, and she's a prolific book author and editor. Her books include Man Swarm, How Overpopulation is Killing the Wild World, with Dave Foreman, The Baby Matrix, Why Freeing Our Minds from Outmoded Thinking About Parenthood and Reproduction Will Create a Better World, and Families of Two, interviews with happily married couples without children by choice. I spoke with Laura a few weeks ago on July 11th, World Population Day. Here's that conversation. Hi, Laura. How are you doing today?
Great, thank you.
Well, August 1st is International Child-Free Day, and that is the day that we're publishing this podcast. And I think we have you to thank for that, right?
Well, yes, I have to say it probably was my idea to resurrect this day. It was a day that an organization called the National Organization for Non-Parents that was around in the 70s. They did every year they celebrated a non-parents day, and in 1973 they did something really fun and celebratory. They chose a male and female national non-parent of the year, and the man who won was a philanthropist and the woman was a teacher, and they had them ride down Fifth Avenue in New York in an open-top cab with laurel leaf crowns, and were crowned non-parent king and queen, near the Plaza Hotel. And several years ago, I learned about this, and I thought what a great idea it would be to, over 40 years later, see if I could get a group of child-free authors and even bloggers and people out there talking about this choice to bring back the day as an annual recognition of people who choose, not to have children. And so we've been doing it for 4 years running now, and it's been great. Well,
that's pretty neat. Are the reasons for resurrecting that the same as the reasons for doing it originally?
That's a good question. The National Organization for Non-Parents, in their day, the organization did some great work to educate society that parenthood was optional. And so I think in that sense, we were about that as well, one of the reasons why we're doing it today. I think also we also want to have it be a way to recognize just amazing child-free people in their lives. And I feel like it's a great way a positive way to foster the acceptance of this choice in today's society. So we're dovetailing a little bit, I think, on what that organization did some years ago.
So the purpose isn't to take pity on those poor childless couples.
Just the opposite. It's to celebrate lives, that where parenthood was not the central focus, and to really highlight that there's many different ways to live life, and life with parenthood is just one of them.
And you'll notice I mentioned childless, and I thought we should talk about why it's called Child-Free Day versus Childless Day. Huh?
Yes, good question. Yeah, there's a lot of talk online, and there has been for some years where some people go, what's the difference between child-free and childless, and why do you have to even discern the difference anyway? So there's different opinions. Mine still stands that I think that at least where we are now, that using the word child-free is more pointing more towards people who consciously made that choice. It's not people who wanted children and for whatever reason don't have them. We tend to use the word childless in that case. So that way it discerns between whether it's really a conscious choice or it's something that, you really want but don't have. And for the both groups of men and women for whom that applies, there's some, big differences on how they see their lives and how they see parenthood in or not in it.
Well, obviously, we're going to want to get into the subject of why there is some value in doing this celebration. But before we do, let's kind of get through some of the housekeeping details about International Child-Free Day. Now, we're recording this podcast well before International Child-Free Day. We're actually recording it on World Population Day, which is interesting in itself, and we might talk about that a little later.
Sure.
But that means that while we're recording, you cannot tell me who this year's honorees are, correct?
I cannot yet, no, but I can tell you past winners, some examples of just the kind of people that each year I put together a selection panel, and on that panel are the winners from the year before and some child-free authors who are willing to put in that time. And in past years, we've awarded to people from all over the world. For example, the first year, a writer from Belgium won, and a woman from the States who was really dedicated to reproductive rights, and she's an author of a book called, I love this title, How Geek Girls Will Rule the World. So she's up to some great stuff just in bringing more women into technology is something she's dedicated to. Another year, a documentary filmmaker from Canada won, and last year, a really great child-free guy who's dedicated his career to the service of our country. He's in the Navy doing some great things. We chose him as the winner. So each year there's just we get a variety of nominations. It's so wonderful to be able to review the nominations and then do some great discussion on who we choose to be the winners of each award for the man and woman. So right now we're collecting some great nominations for this year, and so far it's from the United States and a few countries in Europe. So on August 1st, you can go to internationalchildfreeday.com to find out the winners.
Well, great. That was my next question. So you're one step ahead of me, Laura. All right. Well, and before we move on into why the need for this, maybe you could, and maybe this is actually part of the answer. Can you share with us a little bit about how and why you came to be so passionate about a world in which women are free of pressure to have children?
Well, on a personal level, it goes back to, I would say, the late 90s, where at that time I had been married for about 10 years, and I went looking for a book about long-time married couples who made that choice, because my husband and I had made that choice, and our friends, many of whom were starting to have children, already had them, and I was looking around for who are those older couples that have been together for many years who never had kids because they didn't want them, and what was the key to them going to the distance, as it were. I didn't find that book anywhere, so I decided I'd go out and find out myself. And I ended up conducting 100 interviews across the United States and short stories. It was developed into Families of Two, my second book actually, and it was recognized great internationally. It was clear that people wanted to start having this conversation. So that's how it all germinated, and from there I've just continued to do some research, and that led me to doing the baby matrix, but we can talk a little bit more about that if you want. But the Families of Two really sparked my interest from a personal level, and then I've been doing just research ever since, and trying to, mission to try to educate more people about the choice, and it's really okay to make it.
Well, let's get into that. Why it seems like it would just be natural that we all know it's okay to make that choice. But the fact is, there are things in our culture, there are myths in our culture, societal pressures that kind of distort that decision-making process.
Boy, that's really a lot of what the baby matrix looks at and examines and tries to demystify, and really the cultural pressures, that are associated with myths. They're just so powerful. Three are the most powerful, I think, just in my research travels and just what I see out there as social and cultural norms. One is just the idea that there's actually something wrong with you if you don't want to raise children. And as far as women go, the subcategory there would be that you're not really, really a true woman. You're not really in a sign. It's not a sign. It's a sign of womanhood, to have a child. And if you don't want to have a child, well, you're not quite that full woman. Another that's really powerful is that somehow we don't know what true fulfillment in life is unless we include the raising of children in our adult lives. And third, this one is just so stubborn, too, that I really ran across it when I was researching families of two, is this idea that somehow people who decide not to have children are just automatically selfish, people. And really, it's so far from what I've learned. So many people who make the choice they're busy contributing in other ways to the world and their communities, and they find really very rich fulfillment in their lives. So those are just three that I really take a look at and say, well, why do we believe this anyway? And what if we changed our mindset away from this myth that would then free people to make decisions that are just probably they're better for them and what they want to do in their lives without this outside pressure telling them there's something wrong with it. If they do what they want.
So what have you found so far in your research about, and tell me if it's changed, over the 15 plus years that you've been digging into this? What are the reasons most often cited by women for choosing the number of children or choosing not to have children?
Well, I think that you hear many people, I'm sure by now have just heard that a lot of people, what I found with families of two, and it's been, again, 15, 16 years ago, a lot of it really still holds true today. I think some people really do want to focus more on their work lives. They do have goals in their professional lives that they want to reach, and they just feel that adding parenthood would make that too complicated, and that certainly can include people that are involved in may not be their job that they make their money at, but it's another cause that they're passionately involved in. Many have talked about, and still do, they talk about how bringing a child into their marriage, they just wonder how that will affect the marriage, and they're not really sure it will end up affecting it in a positive way. So they're very clear that the marriage is first, and they really are looking hard at, what would happen to it if we added kids to it. Others, thank goodness, have had, environmental concerns, not as many as I would like, I have to say, but there are some who really, that is the driving reason. They have, they don't want to add the carbon footprint, and some even are very mindful that they're not sure they want to bring a child into the world right now. So it's on that, trajectory. And from a practical standpoint, a lot are very concerned just about the money it takes to raise them. It's very expensive to raise kids today. So those are all reasons, but I find that what's still really the nugget here is what's most important is no matter what their concerns are, when it comes down to it, really, their desire to raise a child is not, greater than any of these concerns that they have. Or saying it another way, at the core, they don't have a strong enough desire to have the raising of children sort of be the central focus of their lives. So the point is, they may have these objectives or other, concerns, but underneath that, there's really just a lack of desire to have the raising of children be like, the central point in their adult lives. That's what I continue to find. That's what I've found, researching families of two, and really, if I really drill down in interviews today, that's really where it still lands.
I suppose in a perfect world, we would hope that every couple would actually consider everything on that list when they're making that decision.
Yes, and I think many do, and many times people who actually make the choice not to have children are the ones who've really analyzed it, and really together laid out their concerns, and they think a lot about it. I think that's a myth too, that people who make the choice not to just don't want to have kids, or they don't like kids, and it's really not the case for many couples. It's it can be it's something that really needs a very hard look, and to them to come to a decision, which I think it's a good thing. I think it's a responsible way to approach it, because it's a big job, and it's really something very important to do. So
you mentioned these myths that are, I guess we could put under the heading of cultural pressures to have children, and similar subject, almost identical, would be societal acceptance of choosing not to have children. What do women And is it just women? Maybe, I suppose it's probably fathers or potential fathers as well. What do they experience in the world? How do they experience these pressures? How do they manifest themselves?
Good question. Well, certainly the cultural and social pressure around the idea that there's something wrong with you. I think a lot of child-free people feel judged in that way, that others see them as, they're missing something or something's just not right about them, or they believe that it will only be a matter of time before they'll see what they really want, and that is to have kids. So, and then the child-free get a little put off by that, by saying, well, how is it that you somehow know me better than me? So there's a judgment realm, but there's also, I find, a lot of pressures that fall into maybe one of three categories. One very common is what I just like to call a relational pressure, where we can get this pressure from loved ones or even our parents that, they want us to do what they did as a way for us to be closer with them and have something huge in common. And, that's a good thing. To be closer is good. So it's to strengthen. The pressure comes from an intention to strengthen the relationship and be closer. But then in the process, sometimes we might get what I consider guilt-driven pressure, where it's, kind of intended to make you feel badly about doing what others want you to do. And it can come in a lot of different ways, from how someone might say to you and your family, how you're disappointing the family, you're disappointing our parents, or you'll be responsible for your spouse's, lack of fulfillment in life, whether that's true or not. And this also applies to, by the way, if you already have children, such as you only have one child, that others may give you this guilt-driven pressure that, Johnny really needs a sibling to really be a well-adjusted child, which is a complete myth, and we can talk about that if you want. But then thirdly, there's just what I call nosy to invasive pressure, and these are just things that are just go, maybe over the top, where loved ones or parents are asking directly about potential physical or, emotional problems that might be going on in the relationship, or, or have you decided to go off the pill? Or I've even heard from a few couples already that their parents have said, we'll buy you a house if you guys have a kid.
Wow.
I guess that would be beyond invasive. That could be considered bribery.
Wow. Well, I was sitting here thinking that most of this sounds like it's things that come up in conversation, that it's probably not that a landlord won't rent you a house because you don't have kids. You probably don't run into that kind of thing too often. Yeah. Yeah, we probably need more of that. Just, coming from the standpoint of a sustainable population advocate, which I am, I would right. I might be tempted to applaud that. But I have to say that I run into very few women who have adult children who aren't kind of, anxious to have grandchildren. I've run into very few women who say, no, I don't want grandchildren, or I'm ambivalent about it even.
Oh, yes. You mean would-be grandparents saying, I don't really care about that, or it's not important to me. Yes, I think you're right. I think where we are, this maybe dovetails a little into where we are in terms of the acceptance of this choice, just from a bigger society level or look, is I think with every generation, we're seeing more acceptance of this choice, just socially and culturally, honestly. But where I find it still stuck a little is what is it, the NIMBY idea, not in my backyard, is I think would-be grandparents are okay with it if it's somebody else's adult child who makes that choice, for example. But as soon as it's their children, then it can get a little more complicated. Then they come up against, well, we really do want to be grandparents. And so then they go down the common road of some pressure of some kind.
That's pretty
Whether
interesting.
Whether it be just, guilting them or whatever it works in, say, in their family system. So, yeah, I think a lot of would-be grandparents, they do want their kids to do what they did. And so that, too, also is really important to be able to talk about, like when couples say they're getting pressure and they want that pressure to stop. That conversation absolutely needs to include, an understanding, seeking a mutual understanding for the would-be grandparents, to really understand that they need to see what's really in it for them. Why are they pressuring their adult children the way they're pressuring them? Why is it so important to them for them to become grandparents, to take it to a deeper level? And I found that when families can do that, or even with friends and loved ones, if you can go there, I think it really can nip the pressures in the bud if it's done well.
I imagine you have some pretty good advice for anyone who's kind of experiencing some of these pressures, how to deal with that, how to put a stop to that.
Yeah, and what I was just referring to certainly is one of those steps. But like over the years, I just call it a quick 4-part strategy. That one is if you are getting pressure, what the first thing not to do is to lie. And in previous generations, I think this has happened more, where a couple might say that, the reason they're not having kids is because they're having trouble having a child or getting pregnant, or, that something's physically wrong, to send that message so that people will just be quiet and feel badly for them. And then we're done with talking about that. But yet, if you do that, and sometimes you have to continue that lie, which is not good. So instead, I'd say it's really just obviously very important to be clear in your own mind about why you've made the choice. And honestly, sometimes I've talked to people and I really ask them, and it takes them a little while to articulate it in a very succinct way, and be prepared to really tell others in that succinct way. So some prep involved in just thinking about and planning how you want to state it to people who are, say, giving you this pressure. And if you're married or in any kind of committed relationship, it's so important to present a united front, because a lot of times I've found if it's the woman who makes the first comment or starts talking about why she doesn't want to have kids, often his family will think that the reason they're not having kids is because of her, and when really it's because they both made that choice. So it needs to be very clear. And then third, just to nip the pressures in the bud, like don't wait to talk about it. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard over the years where a couple sat on whatever pressure they were getting, and sometimes the interrogation from the people giving them the pressure became so intense that the whole conversation hit a breaking point, and an argument started, and it went down a whole road it didn't need to go on. So it's don't wait once you're feeling it from folks. And then fourth is what I referred to earlier, is the seeking mutual understanding. Is we need to have to be able to ask others, why is it that you want me to have children? Sometimes with would-be grandparents, it means admitting that they might have concerns that if their adult kids don't have kids, it may reflect badly on them in terms of how they raised those kids. So they're fearing judgment from others based on what their adult children are doing or not doing. Maybe they want grandchildren because they want to feel more fulfillment in their later years, and that's taking more precedence or more importance than, what's really important to my adult child and his or her spouse. So getting to that level of conversation, I feel like if they can understand why their motivations for wanting their kids to do something they want them to do, and that they acknowledge that the pressure really stops most of the time. So what it really means is you really need to seek some kind of mutual understanding. That's what I've found work. If couples really just are mindful about trying those 4 steps, a lot of times it brings the families closer because they understand each other more, and I think that's huge.
I would imagine that the more self-doubt you have about your decision, the less effective you are in fending that off, and conversely, the more confident you are about that it's okay, that it's not unnatural to make the choice to be child-free, the better you handle that communication.
Absolutely, I think so. I think the step that you really be clear in your own mind why you feel this way, and be prepared to talk about it, and have a couple focus on that until they're ready, is really, really important. And if you're not sure yet, and you're still in that process of deciding, well, that's what you say. So And the same steps apply if others are still pressuring them, on, hey, make up your mind, or it's only a matter of time before you'll see, that you'll want them. You still get pressures in that indecision mode, but that too, if they can go to seeking mutual understanding, like, hey, why are you so intent on me, making this decision yesterday? So the steps really still do apply. And they also apply to, again, if you have one child and all the myths around one child and how we're supposed to have another one, that seeking mutual understanding is also really important. If the would-be grandparents who want that boy, in addition to the, granddaughter, well, why is that anyway? To go there, I think, is not uncommon. So.
Well, you've mentioned that twice now, and it's time for me to bite. It's time for me to bite. And let's talk about that one child,
Well,
myth.
in terms of population, I think that we would probably both agree that we would promote and want couples to think about, stopping at one child, and or be open to the idea of not having any. So. There's just some huge myths around the one child that I think makes it very hard for people to make that decision. Is that something that you found out there as well?
Oh, definitely. And I'm really looking forward to having some expert debunking going on here. Because, there's so many people who are afraid that they're harming their child if they stop at one, that they're going to raise a child who is not socially adept or, somehow is behind the eight ball.
Right. Well, this is so interesting that to go back to where this bias began, it goes back, at least in my research, to the late 1800s with a psychologist whose name was Stanley Hall. And he was kind of like the Victorian era's Dr. Spock. And he did a study back then on, quote, peculiar and exceptional children. I mean, I just remember that phrase. It's really hard to forget. With about 1,000 child subjects. And he loosely defined that with reasons that were psychological or physical. And so he found 4% were only children that fell into that category. So somehow he concluded that number was entirely out of proportion to children generally, and it meant that an only child is very likely to be peculiar and exceptional, which, it's just amazing. So
the math doesn't seem right.
No, it doesn't. So as you might imagine, his studies have been criticized for reflecting his own beliefs, and in actuality, his boyhood included he was one of many siblings, okay? He had lots of brothers and sisters. So it's still a mystery to me, even though the studies after Hall's did not really stand up to the rigors of good research. Somehow, the idea has stuck and become conventional wisdom until a really great professor, Toni Falbo, who was a professor of educational psychology and sociology. I think she's still at the University of Texas, Austin. She looked at past studies more closely, and she and her colleagues analyzed well over 100 studies of only children in the United States across class, race, from I think by mid-20s, by say 1925, I believe, and they looked at a number of variables like adjustment, character, achievement, intelligence. They found that only children weren't measurably different from any other kids, except that, along with, say, firstborns and people who only have one sibling, they scored higher on measures of intelligence and achievement. So not only did they find that those kids are no more likely to be lonely, shy, selfish, or even maladjusted, than children with siblings. Personality studies don't make any, distinguishing differences. So she really tried to get out there and, promote and say that, hey, only children really experience benefits that, for example, they don't have sibling rivalry, which, can have an impact on a person's life. There have been studies done about that as well when it was particularly difficult. And they don't have to fight for affection, they don't have to compete for their parents' attention. They tend to be, more, achievement in the high scores in achievement and intelligence. So she was really a pioneer in trying to demystify this only children thing. And I think it's we see more people having one child, but honestly, I think it's because it's more back to that financial reason. It's a pragmatic decision, which is okay with me, the motivation, whatever works for folks. But I think the myths are still they're still pretty powerful, that the only children are looked at maybe as like, oh, they're going to be a little more spoiled or self-involved. And, really a lot of that, it can happen in families with kids with siblings as well. So the Stanley Hall to the Tony Falbo story is really, really a great one on how shoddy research just sticks, and then we have to end up, trying to unravel it years later.
Well, thanks for enlightening us on that. Laura Carroll, let's go back to you mentioned progress has been made, and I would guess that a big part of that would have to do with just the role of women, gender equality, even though we haven't quite reached 100% success there. But if you go back, 50, 60, 70 years when women didn't have much opportunity in the workplace, they were expected to be at home, I would think that, then your options for fulfillment would be a lot more limited, and you would be a lot more inclined to say, well, obviously, I got married, it's time to have kids. And have we seen that, a lot of that attitude changing just because women have so much more, the world is their oyster today?
I would say that a key point on the timeline is when the pill became available to all women. So that gave families the power to plan, when they wanted to have children. And I use that word very specifically because I think at that time, the idea of not having children, it was out there and talked about, but really the power of the pill was it really put family planning into a whole new stratosphere, and, it helped people time their births with their children. And I think that another point on the timeline was really around the time that families of two came out, was when really the internet was just getting going. And I don't know about you, but I remember the first time I got onto a search engine and thought, what the heck is that? It was new. But the last 15, 16 years, websites, the blogs, our online culture has really, I think, fueled an explosion, really, of information and education about opting out of parenthood. And prior to that time, lots was written about it and et cetera, but the digital world has really, I think, helped those who've made the choice and the education about it really come out of the tributaries of society. So it was cultural from the 50s and 60s, but boy, the digital revolution has really, I think, made the progress, generationally speaking, go faster than if we didn't have it.
That's something to think about. And you made me think, wow, we really do. We take the pill for granted, although lately we don't take it for granted as much as we used to.
Right.
Because that seems to be, even that is under attack. But
yes.
But I think I see even today where certainly in industrialized modern nations like the United States, where it's not that difficult to access the pill or certainly condoms and even getting easier in some places to take advantage of other forms of contraception. I think there are still some, even teenage girls who haven't been raised to expect anything else out of life other than to get married and have children.
Well, I certainly think it's modeled for them the most by their own families, and our culture definitely models it very powerfully. And I talk about a lot in the Baby Matrix. In Families of Two, I did that book, and that led me to start asking the question, well, why does society find this choice so hard to accept anyway? And that led me down what I just like to call a rabbit hole, because I went back like generations in time, back to the times of Augustus, for goodness sake. And there's a set of beliefs called pronatalism that exalts the role of parenthood, and that's been the bedrock of a lot of social and cultural norms for many, many years, many generations. And I think our young women today, those norms are still very powerful, that they see them, they feel them, they think that's what's normal. And what I'm trying to do is to have those younger generations, and in the book I market it specifically to people, say millennials and people in college, to say you need to really look at those beliefs, because honestly, that's all they are. It's like been in our cultural hardware for so long. People think that, again, it's wrong if you don't have the desire to have children. Well, if you really analyze it, it's a myth. So we need to break free of these beliefs and have these younger people see that that's all that they are, so that they're freer to make better decisions for themselves as they grow into their adult lives, and help them see that in a world of 7 billion and, continuing to increase just exponentially, that what every birth really means, and what it means if they're the ones who bring those next children into the world. So those young, you're spot on in terms of going right to young people and helping them see the bigger, real picture.
You've been talking quite a bit about two of your books, Families of Two and The Baby Matrix. It sound like they're extremely valuable. I want to get into Manswarm for a minute, but before I forget, what's the best way for someone to find out more about these books and purchase them?
Just go to my website, lauracarroll.com. Easy to find them right there.
Easy as pie. Okay. All right. All right. Now, Manswarm's a little bit more complicated book, and would you care to give us a quick explanation of how you got involved in that project?
Yes. As I was researching The Baby Matrix, I ran across a gentleman named Dave Paxson.
I know that guy.
You know. And I wanted to just learn about more the population issue, because I was looking at a pronatalist assumption we have that all around the right to have children, that anybody who is biologically capable should be able to have children whenever they want. And I was looking at more the social and cultural negative effects associated with that. So overpopulation, I was looking at that and researching that. I saw Paxson's name a lot, so I called him. And it wasn't far into our conversation where we both went, the best book I've read, to date, is Manswarm by Dave Foreman. And we thought that was quite the coincidence. But we also agreed that the first edition was really written for a conservationist community, and not per se to someone in his or her 20s, in college. And so we got the idea to do a second edition that was really designed to be more for the masses, for them to understand the overpopulation crisis. And we got a generous grant to do that. And we got a secondary grant that we're still in the process of implementing, is to get the book in schools and colleges and 2-year community colleges. So we're in play with that, and it's going really well. So I'm super excited about that.
So how's the college program working, and is there anything a listener can do to help us with that?
Well, if you want to help with that, I would say go to my website and just go click the Contact Me little button at the bottom of the homepage, and just email me that, because we've put the message out via social media as well as just doing putting lists together to seek out professors in the United States and Canada, really all over the world. And so if you are a professor, I guess that's obvious. If you are a professor and you're interested in receiving a free complimentary review copy, more than happy to send it to them. So if you know anybody who is in that profession who might want to see the book, we're giving them out complimentary just to see if people want to use them in their coursework. And so far, I expected professors, in environmental studies, maybe environmental sociology, we'd want them they'd be open and looking at the book, and it's definitely been so. But I've gotten requests from professors in psychology and in social problems area of study in universities, ethics classes, philosophy, even religious studies. So very interesting. I think that a lot of professors understand population is an issue that it it's into many other realms, socially and culturally in our world. So far we've got well over 100 reviewing the book and counting, and my hope is that it will be used, in full or in part in a lot of classrooms.
Well, that's good to know. Wrapping up, I mentioned earlier that we're recording this conversation on July 11th, World Population Day. And obviously throughout the thread here, we've alluded to the connection between family size choices and overpopulation. But I want to give you a chance to speak more directly to that. What are your thoughts about the link there and the importance of it?
Well, it's a powerful link because I feel that, and there's a reason why I did the books that preceded Man's Swarm. It just felt to me that if people can see through the myths we have about parenthood, then it releases them from these cultural and social norms, and being released from that or seeing beyond it, it makes them, it will make them freer to make decisions that are best for them, and it will also help people. With that new freedom, they can see that what it means to bring another child into the world, and they're more. My hope and belief is that we will find more people actually choosing not to bring more children into the world because they see the larger picture, and they see that it's more than okay not to bring that child into the world. So the link between demystifying these norms and population stabilization and reduction is powerful. I think that so I'm very motivated to have more people know about that. And it's the same, again, for families with one children, that it's really busting through the myths that you've got one biological child. It's really okay, more than okay for that child. And it's also it's probably the best choice for the world to stop there.
Well, it strikes me that there are two things that have to happen in order for us to be making the decisions we need to be making in order to really to give future children, all the future children of the world, a fair shot at living good lives. One is that we've got to get past this mythology and understand that it's perfectly natural to not have children at all, or to only conceive one. And the other is, I think young couples who are making these family-sized choices really need to know that the world is overpopulated, that we're beyond 7 billion, and that the scientists who've done the most credible research on this so far tend to all agree that a sustainable world population is somewhere well below 3 billion. There's some disagreement about whether it's 1 billion or 2 billion or what, but we know we're way beyond that. But I think many couples do not know that we are, that the world's biocapacity is being injured year after year because of the number of us on the planet.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do feel, though, as someone who's come out of in academia, sociology and psychology, that I think even if they know these truths about overpopulation intellectually, if they still have these attitudes and beliefs grounded in, but there's something wrong with me if I don't want children, if they still believe that, it's very difficult for them to still make the decision based on those intellectual factors. So that's why I push so hard on, the things I talk about in the baby matrix is we've got to look harder at why we think the way we do about parenthood, such that then it will become easier for people to go, and yeah, of course it's a problem. Look at these numbers. So I think from the emotional, attitudinal comes the behavioral change.
Yeah,
that's just maybe my bias.
Well, I will agree. You're doing the more important work, and thank you for that. And I hope you will continue, Laura Carroll, to track this and come back to us with new information and new updates and new ways of kind of getting at that emotional, any of the emotional triggers to help people do the right thing.
I hope to. Thanks so much, and I really, really applaud and respect your work. You're right in there. I have followed your work for some time, and I want to thank you for that as well.
Well, thanks for a great conversation, Laura.
You too. Thank you.
That was Laura Carroll, a leading voice on the child-free choice. Her books include Man's Swarm, The Baby Matrix, and Families of Two. For more information about International Child-Free Day, you can visit internationalchildfreeday.com. Also, to follow Laura Carroll and check out her books, visit lauracarroll.com. That concludes this episode of the Overpopulation Podcast. I'm Dave Gardner, Executive Director of World Population Balance. We work to alert, inform, and educate that overpopulation is a root cause of resource depletion, species extinction, and rising poverty. We advocate and support a smaller, truly sustainable population. Overpopulation is solvable. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We appreciate your financial support. You can find out more about us at worldpopulationbalance.org.